the second. India have won the test match. India have won the series. They're going to get back for two. India home. Lords goes wild.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of the 81 All Out podcast. This is Siddhartha Vaidyanathan at Sidvi on Twitter. And, I'm delighted to be joined today by two special guests, both of whom had a vital role to play in the way we consume cricket online and how over the years we have had access to live scorecards and matches and how we have been able to get live information on cricket around the world. I would not only look at these two guests as pioneers in the area of cricket, but also in the internet in general, because in the early days of the internet in the 90s, they had a vital role to play in the development of the internet itself and not just the sport. So firstly, let me extend a warm welcome to Simon King, who is the founder of what we now call ESPN Cricinfo, but was originally called Cricinfo. And, a remarkable sort of journey for Simon, who now lives in Texas, who has a business of his own, but, back in the early 90s, who actually created the bot called Cricinfo that went on to become what we have so fondly cherished over the years. So welcome to the show, Simon. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you very much for the invite. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you. And also delighted to have here Vishal Misra. Vishal, another integral part of the Cricinfo core back in the day, and had such a vital role to play in the building of the database, in live scoring, and in so much else that went into the early days of Cricinfo. Vishal, of course, is an accomplished academic based in New York. So welcome, Vishal. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, Siddhartha. And it's a pleasure to be here with Simon, talking about the good old days. And we are also here in memory of a very, very special person, Travis. So
yes, exactly. I wanted to actually mention that straight away. The reason for bringing Vishal and Simon together actually was triggered off by a series of conversations that I've been having with Vishal over the really, really sad news that we had over the last few weeks about the passing away of Travis Basevi, who was basically the man who built statsguru on Cricinfo, which every one of you listening would be familiar with, but also who was a genuinely remarkable person, for various reasons that we will touch on today. And Vishal and Simon, of course, knew Travis much better than I did, but I did have the good fortune of working with Travis when I was in Cricinfo. And such a colossal loss to the world of cricket and to the internet, basically Travis can be seen as a pioneer. So condolences to both of you. And I think we should touch upon a lot of what Travis did as well. So, yes, Simon, maybe you can start with that. The shock of hearing about Travis and, what a big loss it is to the cricket world in general.
It's a very big loss. I've known him for nearly 30 years. He was one of the very people who got involved in Cricinfo very early on. One of the first group, probably only 2, 3, 4 months after I started it. And I had a lot of respect for Travis, both as a person and for his integrity and his programming, just everything that he did. To the extent that I actually flew over for his funeral, I felt that was appropriate, that I be there. I described Travis as one of about 6 people, I would say, who have been absolutely pivotal in the development of Cricinfo. Vishal is another one, and I'm one, and I won't name the 3 others, but about 6 people, and he was critical. And I told a little story when I went over to the funeral. I stood up and spoke a little bit, and I started off with the very early days of Cricinfo and of the internet in the 1990s, when the internet didn't, as it is today, did not exist at that time. The internet was really only in academic institutions and military. So people using the internet, you had to install there was no easy, quick install of software. You had to kind of know what you were doing in order to compile software and to get it to run. Then you had to have a Unix machine or a Sun or whatever. So the result was that the people on the internet in those days were mainly postgrads and postdocs. So it was not so many undergraduates, relatively few of those, because they didn't have the facilities in the undergraduate labs at that time. So the people who initially coalesced around the Cricinfo bot that I built were primarily postgrads and postdocs. And then there was Travis. He was a high school kid, which was absolutely remarkable. He stuck out like a sore thumb, but I soon learned that he really was one of the most reliable people out there. And it's gratifying to know that what started as a little hobby for a 17-year-old actually became his career going forward. Travis, of course, is well known for statsguru, and I understand you want to talk a little bit about statsguru, and Vishal actually will know a lot more about that than I do. But I really wanted to pay tribute to Travis and what he did for Cricinfo. He was one of the, well, I'm trying to think how to put this in words. Travis was infinitely reliable. His work was very trustworthy. When he did something, it worked. And you could trust him to finish a task. So when we were tasked with providing live coverage from Malaysia of the ICC trophy in 1997, I think it was 97, we'd just done the World Cup in 96, but we hadn't scored live from the grounds. And then, of course, the Olympics in 96 in Atlanta, they tried to do this live scoring, and it was a complete farce, a total disaster. So we were now trying to cover eight venues in the jungle in Malaysia, in and around Kuala Lumpur. Those venues had no electricity, they had no phone lines, they had precious little, and we arrived there with 2 weeks to go. So in 2 weeks, we had to recruit scorers, we had to train them, we had to buy computers, install the computers, get phone lines installed, and get power. Now, typical lead-in time for installing a phone line in Kuala Lumpur in those days was about 6 months.
Wow.
Fortunately, David Richards, who was the head of the ICC and who we've been working with very, very closely, actually knew the King of Malaysia. And guess what? We got him in 2 days.
Whoa.
So that was handy. But anyway, the person I took with me to do that, to actually make that happen, was Travis. And he was only 22 at that time. But we had one of the computers got eaten by rats. Actually just got in and ate all the cables. But for the other 7 grounds, we had successful coverage from those 7 grounds with a 2-week lead-in. And that was 95% Travis. And that's, what he went on. We all know what he went on to do. But he was my go-to guy that I took to Dakar, to Nairobi, to Singapore, to Malaysia. So he and I were really sort of at the forefront of doing the live scoring from the grounds. And that's probably all I have to say about Travis at the moment. Just he's very sorely missed.
Absolutely. Wonderful story. This ICC trophy, of course, which Bangladesh won, beating Kenya in that really thrilling final. And then that helped Bangladesh get test status 3 years later because of they entered the World Cup. They beat Pakistan in that match in the World Cup, etc., etc. Vishal, of course, you and Travis are joined at the hip forever because of Travishal. And thank all the Cricinfo, so many of the Cricinfo scorecards that thank you and Travis at the end of them. Talk a bit about your friendship with him. You have, of course, I will link the article that you wrote recently, which was published in Cricinfo. I can link that, but it'll be good to also for our listeners to know, about the bond that you shared and, how much it's been hard, how hard it's been for you to deal with this in the last few weeks.
Yeah, I mean, it's been really hard. I was the one actually who told Simon both about the diagnosis and when he finally passed away. My bond with Travis. So in 1993, I had just moved to the US as a grad student. I came here to do my PhD and was always a huge cricket fan. And in those days, finding cricket in the US was extremely difficult. I remember I used to go to, I was doing my PhD at UMass Amherst, and it was about a 2-hour drive to Boston. And in Cambridge, there used to be this store, this bookstore that would sell international magazines. And there we would go and get India Today. Like they would sell India Today, and to get some coverage of cricket, from India today is. So cricket was very, very difficult to find. Although there were leagues I started playing as soon as I landed cricket. Various universities. Boston had a thriving Caribbean league, so playing was fine, but getting news was difficult. And I started, once I started my PhD, I started reading news groups. Usenet was big those days. And there I discovered rec.sport.cricket.
Yeah.
And through rec.sport.cricket, I found out about IRC and the channel cricket. So, I was thrilled that, okay, there is a community where I can get some news, some scorecards, whatever I want. So I immediately joined IRC and I discovered Cricinfo and sort of a community around cricket. And that's where I met Travis for the first time. And, we just hit it off right away. We had sort of the same shared sense of humor. And we soon discovered that we both loved Beavis and Butthead. I don't know if you know about that show, but we used to do this whole routine of, talking like Beavis and Butthead and Cornfolio and all that. And, there was
and I think you got thrown out of rooms because of that also.
Yeah, sometimes we wouldn't stop. People just shut up, but Travis and I just wouldn't stop. And there was one character that we used to really love going after. We were convinced that character was an act. Like he was pretending to be this guy. There's a guy called Bhim, Bhim.
Okay.
And we used to have so much fun on hash cricket. And, pretty soon I joined the sort of Cricinfo core group. I think either late fall or early spring of late fall of 93, I think that's when I became involved. And my big thing those days was Linux. And I used to say Cricinfo should move to Linux, and Linux is this and that, and this is the future, and you should do that. And I used to sort of constantly talk about Linux. And eventually we did move to Linux, but I remember I used to be a Linux evangelist or fierce advocate of Linux. I used to talk Linux all day or cricket, but I think Simon and others probably got sick of me talking about Linux. But anyway, it became clear that I knew some sort of technical stuff and I could help Cricinfo with those things. So I became involved then. And Travis and I, we became friends on Hash Cricket and we started working together for various aspects. And, scorecards was one big thing. So we were both very, very sort of particular about stats and we were fascinated with stats. And on rec.sport.cricket, there used to be a guy from Indiana called Aslam Siddiqui. I don't know if you have heard the name and he used to post a lot of very, very interesting stats those days on. We can go to the archives of RSC and find Aslam's posts. And Travis and I used to talk about that. How is he doing it? It's clearly the output of some sort of a program because the way his posts used to be formatted, it looked very structured. So he had a full sort of database somehow. He never shared how he was generating those stats, but he used to generate those stats in post. So that got us talking that, we should do something like this for Cricinfo where anybody can come and create their own stat. So the seeds of statsguru were sort of planted by our observing what Aslam was doing on RSC and wanting to replicate it on Cricinfo for everyone.
I was just going to sort of back that up with Travis really understood data. He understood databases and garbage in, garbage out. And one of the very early problems at Cricinfo was formatting the scorecards. We had to do it manually in a word processor. And that was an incredibly laborious task. And Travis actually took on quite a lot of that. This is before the formatted by Travis Vishal, which I guess Vishal's probably going to go on to talk about. But yeah, he fundamentally understood data, which was great.
We will talk about Cricinfo and the statsguru and the building of it and how it came about. But before that, maybe I can go back to Simon. Interesting. You spoke about rec.sports.cricket. I mean, even now, actually, you can go back and see the archives there, and it's quite funny to go and read. Just pick a random date in the early 90s or mid 90s and go and read the posts, and it's hilarious. I mean, I actually went back to some of Travis's posts where there's a game that he does a live scorecard of, and one of those most hilarious sort of commentary that he's giving about the game, which is part satire, part real. But yeah, it's great. You can go back. But, not many listeners may know about IRC. So I think it's important to give them a bit of a intro to that. I think one can call it the original Twitter. I mean, that's how I saw the format as well. You have a handle, you go there and you post things, and then other people come and comment on it. I mean, different interface compared to Twitter, but a similar concept. Simon, can you talk a bit about IRC and what your memories of it back then?
Sure. It's an internet relay chat, the chat rooms. I'm not sure what the modern equivalent is because I really don't do that stuff anymore. But there were mud rooms and
they still have chat rooms now. So yeah, maybe
I actually don't Twitter either. So but it was great. It was transformative, absolutely groundbreaking. It was really the first time that you could sit and communicate with people from all over the world. They weren't. I mean, at that time, the internet didn't reach very far. I said it was mainly in academic institutions, and that was it. I think the whole of South Africa was linked on a 64K line, the whole country. At 64 kilobits. So when we did get a participant in from South Africa, which was actually a guy called Peter Van Wylen, it was remarkable. It was crazy just to be able to talk in real time with somebody in South Africa without having to pick up a telephone and pay $17,000 a minute or whatever it was in those days to make international calls. It was super expensive, and that was revolutionary. Yeah. So I found it in '92, thanks I think to Professor Rao.
P.S. Rao, yeah.
Of North Dakota, and became an avid user. I was a cricket fan. I was living in Minneapolis at the time, and the only way for me to actually get live cricket information was to get a shortwave radio, and I'd go and stand at the end of the parking lot, pointing the aerial when it was 30 degrees below zero. So I can remember doing that multiple times. And then
I can imagine like the Boxing Day test would have been 30 degrees below zero, and you would have been trying to get
trying to pick up Test Match Special on the BBC World Service, and which you could get it in those days, but you had to. It was only on shortwave. And then we coalesced around this channel Hash Cricket, for which you had to install a client called IRC, which was wasn't a simple thing. I mean, a simple thing to a computer scientist, but I was an electron microscopist, and the first program I ever wrote actually was Cricinfo. I'd never written a computer program before that.
Wow.
So it was a case of just, there wasn't a manual. You just had to learn, to figure it out. And so the first thing I ever compiled was an IRC client. I didn't even know about compiling. I didn't know the word. Except for reference to an anthology or something like that. So that was my sort of baptism of fire into computing. But then once in there, it is addictive, as I guess you could say about online chat or social media in these days. And what would happen is the vast majority of the people were in the United States and Canada, because that's where the penetration of the internet was at its height. Every now and then you'd have someone come on from the UK or from South Africa, or I think not from India early on. When did the internet reach India? I'm trying to say it was sort of during that period.
It was during that period, but even then it was restricted to the IITs, IISc, and the sort of general population did not have internet.
Right. Well, also, yeah, and a lot of universities I don't think had it. Just the main ones.
Most universities, it was only the IITs and IISc, and
Right.
there was an organization called ERNet,
Right.
which is responsible for, and again, like South Africa, the entire country of India had, I think, a 256K or a 128K line when I was I remember. I used to download Linux every night.
So the point I was going to make was that every now and then, if someone did come on from a cricket-playing country, they would get swamped. Everyone would just descend on them and say, "What's the score? What's the score? Can you give us some commentary? Can you give us some information?" And there might be someone coming in from a cricket-playing country where live cricket was on every few hours, perhaps, and then other people would phone home to get the score. Some people had a satellite. Rao had a satellite dish, big old satellite dish that he was able to get some of the clean feeds of the cricket broadcasts. But it was very, very intermittent. Just the poor people that would come in from India, or well, not really from India, as I was saying, in those days, in the very early days, but from the UK, actually, probably primarily, and Australia. Yeah, UK, Australia, probably the main two, UK and Australia. And they would get absolutely deluged. The poor sods. It was terrible for them because they come in and people would be pleading, please, give us a score, give us a score. So, and that probably drove quite a few of them away.
And you also mentioned in an interview, I think it was in that same video in Zoom call that Vishal mentioned, or maybe it was in one of the Cricinfo interviews that you did, that the issue with this IRC was that people would come, put the score, and then it would never be updated. Yeah, it would just, somebody coming 2 hours later would still see the score that it was 2 hours earlier, right? Yeah.
It would scroll away. We started putting the current score in the topic, but even then people didn't read it. They were just, you still got, again, deluged with what's the score. So you saw, score is 250 for 7, and then it would scroll off the top of the screen, and then another couple of people would join, and go, what's the score, and that was the push that really led to my starting Cricinfo, is trying to make some kind of permanent resource where you didn't get plagued with what's the score. But it was also about building the sort of database that it became. That was actually intentional right from the start.
Yeah, so you built the bot, which would then give the score to anyone who wanted it, right?
Well, I built the database.
Okay.
In fact, Cricinfo kept using the same structure of database that I built in '93 for about 15 years until I think Travis did it. It was the new content management system, and Vishal, you probably know more about that than I do. And that database then got thrown out, or that database structure. But I built the whole structure.
And just to get a bit more clarity on that, the database was built with volunteers from around the world, right? Because I think you asked around people to put in scorecards and from not only current matches but also from historical.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, the concept was there's got to be so much information just on hard drives around the planet. Let's try and centralize it and get it all together. If somebody type a scorecard, or had a report, or had a photograph, or actually we didn't have photographs right in the early days, but so it was all text based. Yeah, that was the idea right from the beginning. For about the first week, everyone just sort of everyone said, "This is a stupid idea. This is what I got, and we don't want this thing on the channel." And then a couple of people started getting involved, and one of the first, if not probably the first, was Murari Venkatraman. And he is also one of the people, 6 people I'd say are most instrumental in Cricinfo being what it is today, or even existing in the continuing to exist. Actually, there were many existential threats to Cricinfo during its early life. And it then started growing, and I was actually running it on my computer account on the University of Minnesota. And it was IRC bot. It was resource heavy. I think the computer probably worked at 3 kilohertz, something like that. And everything was phenomenally slow. And then the sysadmin in Minnesota said, "Get that thing off of here. Get it out of here. I don't want it. It's slowing the whole computer system for everybody, and it's using up data storage and all that stuff." And that's when Raoul came in and said, hey, I've got a computer you can use. And it was in North Dakota, sitting on his desk at the University of North Dakota. And that was my first real sort of programming nightmare, because I had written the thing not knowing anything about programming. So I put complete paths to every subroutine, every routine that I did had a complete path, and there were no environment variables whatsoever. So the idea of like $home or $end or any of those things. So and I'd already written thousands of lines at that point. So I had to then port it over to Rails. And that's when I learned about using variables. And so I rewrote the whole thing in a way that made it portable. And also made it so I could let other people in, because I couldn't let other people in on the Minnesota account. That would have been a big no-no. Can't give people remote access to the university's computers. And which meant that, yes, I was getting material, but then it was up to me to do the whole thing from there. I had to format it, I had to load it, I had to structure it, everything. And then, so I remember that porting across to Raoul's computer probably took a couple of weeks from memory. It was a lot of effort. But then finally I was able to then open it up and let people like Murari, I think was the first one I let in, let other people actually come in and manage it. And that's when the growth really started to take off.
Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, I think more than anything else, I mean, back in the early 90s, to think of a database, to think of bringing all of cricket's, not only scorecards, but all of cricket's information to one spot is an audacious bit of imagination in itself, because no other sport was really thinking on those lines. I don't think there is an example of any other. I mean, I think cricket was a pioneer in this regard, and which is often not recognized. And it's amazing how, America, which is the home of so many other sports, was the birth of cricket's pioneering website. And that is such an amazing story in itself. And even like I've read of things about what is that quarterback? Something about the Minnesota Vikings had this fan who used to do play-by-plays, for their games but that was like 98 or something, which was like almost so many years after Cricinfo was already doing it for cricket. So, and he is considered a pioneer. So you can imagine how pioneering Cricinfo was. So
NFL.com and NBA, none of these things existed. People often
absolutely.
For Cricinfo, there was nothing. Nothing whatsoever. It's difficult to visualize that now when you've got so much at your fingertips in just about everything. But back in 92, 93, there was nothing.
Yeah, absolutely. I was actually fortunate to interview Professor Rao, towards the end of, the late Professor Rao, I must say. And he, had all these amazing stories and about Robert Ells, who was doing ball-by-ball commentary from Australia and things. And it's quite a different world altogether. But yeah, Vishal, you can maybe talk a bit about that, the database, and you later, of course, were involved in actually inputting so many of the scorecards as well. So maybe a bit about the building of the database.
Sure. So again, as I said, you linked to that article, but when Simon said database, it's not in the conventional sense of a relational database. It was They were basically text files. And one thing that's common between Simon, Travis, and me is all of us were electrical engineers.
Oh, okay.
So even I was not a computer programmer.
So the database actually was a collection of files, text files. That's what the database. It was a directory structure more than a database. And again, as Simon said, the database was contributed by volunteers all around the world. They would type it up and send it to us. And even though a lot of people spend time in sort of fixing the format, but everyone was doing it on their own. So the formats were all different. There were a lot of errors in the scorecard. Somebody had typed it up. And this was an issue that Travis and I kept discussing, that we have to figure it out, how to sort of complete the database and make it accurate so that we could generate stats. And that's how this whole project of completing the test and ODI scorecard database for cricket was started. And, so once Simon was actually aware of it, that we were working on it, and we told him that we're going to do it. And after we had finished doing it, I think a couple of weeks after that, I visited England, and I saw Simon, and he took me to Lord's. And we had just finished the database, and I think we were about to announce it on the internet somewhere around that time, late summer of 95 or early fall. But I remember after finishing it up, going to London, meeting Simon for the first time. I didn't know what he looked like until I saw him. He came on his bike. And then in fact, I remember I was coming to England and he asked me to get a suit along.
Okay.
Because you're not allowed in the members' room, Lords, without a jacket.
Without a suit, correct.
Carried a suit as a grad student only to get into Lords. Yeah. But summer of 95 is when we completed the test and ODI scorecard database. Second database, I'm saying in quotes, and the intention was to generate accurate stats. First of all, to have it would add a lot of credibility to Cricinfo if we had the complete database, accurate database. And secondly, it would help generate stats, right? Unless you have the right input, you're not going to get the right output. So there was no way for us to generate stats automatically without having scorecards. So that was sort of the first step.
For our viewers, is it fair to say that the database is currently, if you go to the Cricinfo archive section with all the years and all that, is that fair to say that that is the database that you built?
Yeah, that is the database. So that's what Simon, when he says, the sort of directory structure.
Yeah.
In fact, the directory used to be called link to database, link _to _database. And that's
okay.
So by year, and then every year would have a different series. So when you click on that directory, then you go to the series, and you have scorecards and stats. But yeah, that was the database. So the whole directory structure that we have.
Okay, got it. Yeah.
Actually, by half year.
Half year.
Yeah, that's just remarkable. I mean, I go to that almost every day, probably. I mean, that part of the site. To reference something in the past, and then the stats that was connected to it, and so many other things also. The records, each series, many series have the records connected as well. Yeah.
Actually, something people might not know about that whole talking about scorecard formatting, that originated. I started that because there was an 80 character limit on IRC.
Oh wow!
Everything had to fit in 80 characters across. So, and if you just sent something through that hadn't been formatted, it just came out as garbled. It was unreadable. So everything had to be formatted in exactly the same way to 80 characters, which was a tremendously labor-intensive operation. And then I think what really prompted things was when the ACS came along, and that's when we acquired the whole full.
Yeah, ACS is Association of Cricket Statisticians, for those who are not familiar. Yeah.
So, we actually, Travis and I spent a long time coming up with a V1 format of this scorecard that would fit into 80 characters. And there was one cricketer who was primarily responsible for how we ended up with that. Bromley Davenport. And unfortunately, not only did he take wickets, he also took catches. So we had to fit his name in the scorecard, batting, taking catches, taking wickets, and have sort of everything aligned. So we spent sort of quite a bit of time, and then Travis and I came up with Cricinfo scorecard V1, and that's what we decided should our scorecard should look like.
Okay.
And
this reminds me of Sivaramakrishnan caught Sivaramakrishnan bowled Ananta Padmanabhan or something, which would which would take up the whole scorecard pretty much.
In fact, yeah, we were dreading if he made his test debut, he'd be in a lot of trouble. But he became an umpire.
Yeah, now he's an umpire. Yeah.
Now he's an umpire. Yeah. But so that summer of '95, first we worked on getting the format right, and then there were some of these ACS had something. There were also commercial packages where they had their own database. There were Windows programs where you could run them to generate stats for a series or for a collection of games.
What about those? Yeah.
So Travis and I, but we couldn't put that up on Cricinfo. Well, first of all, there was no way then to have like a Windows program being accessed over the internet, and then there would be all sorts of, I guess, copyright issues. So what we did was we kind of reverse engineered the scorecards from that database. So this way we were able to sort of create raw data for all tests and all ODIs to complete our database. And then I started working on taking that raw data and sort of printing it out in our Cricinfo V1 format. And I was doing all of this in Perl.
Okay.
Travis at that time could not program at all.
Yeah.
And he was in Australia, and that summer I was doing an internship close to New York City in Westchester County. And I would I would finish my day's work, then go home. I was living at a Y. Go have my dinner, then come back when there was no one in the office. And that was around the time when Travis would be waking up in Australia. And then we'd start working on it. And I think we were still using IRC as our mode of communication. And every day, I would generate a fresh set of scorecards based on the raw data. And then Travis would go one by one, cross-check those scorecards against things like wisdom and find errors and correct them. And this was a very sort of labor-intensive process. And he would complain. He would do it because he, as Simon said, that first of all, he was very reliable and he was a perfectionist. So he couldn't stand if there was an error anyway. So he made sure that there was no error in the scorecards. And so every detail he would check. But because it was labor-intensive, we thought, can we speed this process up? And that's when, the earliest genesis of statsguru can be traced. So what we started doing was we created these scripts which would take a few tests at a time. So we would give them inputs of some tests and generate aggregate stats for those tests.
Got it.
So now what you would have is you would take a bunch of tests and generate stats, and then you'd have the stats for the series, let's say.
Yeah, so if you have 5 tests in a series, you would have most runs, most wickets, everything. Yeah.
So if there are major errors, they should show up there, and you could just cross-check that against what you have in Wisden or Playfair or whatever sort of printed versions of stats that we had access to. And that kind of sped up the process. And the way we had done it was these scripts simply took sort of a list of games or the file names as the input and generated stats on that. Then we started being creative with the scripts. So all you needed was a list of tests. So we could write scripts using Unix commands, which would, let's say, search for all tests that Botham played. So just look for Botham in the file names. Pipe that into another, which would find tests where Brierley was the captain.
Okay.
So now you have a subset of the tests that Botham played under Brierley, and we could do the reverse. Tests which Botham played not under Brierley. And we could compare his record playing under Brierley versus not under Brierley and see if there was a dramatic difference. And, we thought, if this could be made available to everyone, this is like the dream for, fans.
Cricket arguments.
Yeah. Our database was complete. We announced it, and everyone started coming to Cricinfo, checking the scorecard, and people were very excited. And then I think around that time, a journalist approached Simon to write an article about Cricinfo for Wired. He later joined Cricinfo, but this was a few years into everything. Even our database was complete. Alex Balfour.
Oh, Alex Balfour. Yeah.
And so he wrote an article, and I think he interviewed both Travis and me for the article, but Travis was very, very sort of, I don't know what to say. He didn't like the spotlight. So I think he refused to answer his questions, or so I, on behalf of Travis Shah, I answer the questions, and I'll read this. I mean, you can go on Google and search for this article, but that article says Cricinfo's programmers have built up the ability to perform complex database searches. One of its recent programs, for example, allows you to compare Ian Botham's performances under Mike Braley to his efforts under other England captains. So, the thing that we've been playing with, and it says cricket fans would die for such a toy. It would settle clubroom arguments at a stroke and engender new ones just as easily. At the moment, Cricinfo is withholding the search programs from general users. Here's the demand will overwhelm the system. But the only real limit on new bells and whistles is server speed. And then the final line of that paragraph is one I've always cringed about. It says most search scripts can be written in a matter of days. I said in a matter of minutes. Which self-respecting programmer would say that I can write a script in a matter of days? So he misquoted me there, and then said, and the way he described me was, says Vishal Misra, Cricinfo's chief Perl programmer. I had this title that I was the chief Perl programmer, but that's what it is. But in that paragraph, you can see statsguru kind of being born. Right?
Yeah, the Botham Braley example is definitely probably tells you where it was heading in terms
where
of
it was heading.
Yeah,
it's when Travis eventually built it. So
yeah,
the vision was there. He kept at it, and like I told you, he didn't know programming. He picked up Perl, looking at my awful scripts showing this. I mean, I can't. Perl as it is a difficult language to read. If I had access to my script, then I would have no idea what they were doing. But he somehow took them and used them as the basis for statsguru. And then he picked up SQL, like real sort of database programming. And he picked up HTML, writing web programs, all because he wanted his vision of statsguru to come alive. And it did.
That is a fundamental thing about Cricinfo. I started Cricinfo because I built what I wanted. I wanted Cricinfo to exist. I wanted to have that resource. And then also talking about the contributors. One of the very early principles was, if you don't do it, who do you expect to? So someone would come and say, well, why haven't you got this scorecard? I said, well, hey, you got a job for you. Why don't you go and do it? And so acknowledging all the contributors was very, very important. So every single file had who it was contributed by. Sometimes there were multiple people. It was always just the last person. So the person that actually donated it to Cricinfo was the one that was done as contributed by. But that was really vital as well in growing Cricinfo. Just saying, if you don't do it, who do you expect to? And then also, I used to publish the list of contributors. I think I had a script that generated it every day, automatically generated a list, and we would go and post who are the top contributors to Cricinfo. Hey, thanks guys, good job.
Yeah, I would actually, I grew up reading newspapers and scorecards in newspapers, obviously, because back then in the 90s, I didn't have access to the internet. But I would urge all our listeners to, just pick out any Cricinfo scorecard, just open it and spend some time on it, because it is truly a beautiful document. It gives you so much information, whether it's the ends in the ground, whether it's the umpires who umpired that game, the notes that come at the end of it with all the records that you often see, tiny things, who won the toss, these are things that traditional, newspapers often miss out. They give you the scores, they give you this, but Cricinfo scorecard paints such a wonderful picture of the match that you can actually then start to dig deeper into what happened. And then you can sometimes find out, okay, so this bowler started this is the first bowler in the bowling record. So he would have probably started bowling from this end with this umpire in there. And then it opens out a completely new world for you. So, I think all you, Simon, Vishal, and everyone else who had a role to play in that scorecard, it's a magnificent document. So thank you for that format.
I just got one more thing about IRC. You asked, you know what, the nearest modern equivalent probably is Slack.
Oh, yes, Slack, yeah.
Slack, and I would say one word that you hear a lot these days is called Mastodon.
Mastodon, correct.
So yeah, Mastodon is kind of like Twitter-like, but you have to join different servers. So IRC was also, or is probably still federated in the way that there are different servers that you could join, and those servers would talk to each other.
Yeah.
So there were a bunch of different IRC servers. When you start up IRC, you have to tell that program which server to join.
You had to know which server.
Yeah. And these servers,
so it was decentralized. Yeah.
Decentralized that way, yeah.
Yeah, but now that we're talking about statsguru, I think we should spend a little bit of time on this. Now, usually computer softwares, when they're written, there are updates, there are things that get better, they get outdated pretty quickly. I mean, it's not like something that was written in the mid-90s is relevant today in several fields. I mean, there are so many new versions of it that come out, and then you look back and say, oh, look at that version we had first up. It was so rudimentary. I mean, you can go to the Cricinfo website from the late 90s if you do an archive search, and then you'll see how the website was, and now you see. But statsguru, it has stood the test of time so well that even today, there is nothing that compares. Of course, you have Cricket Archive's Player Oracle that's there. I mean, they have built their own wonderful system, but statsguru is still so relevant for cricketing filters and for cricketing stats. And for someone to do that who 1 year earlier didn't even know how to program, I mean, just boggles the mind.
Yeah, he was a smart cookie.
So none of you knew much about what he was building? He just built it and said, here it is?
So when he finally announced it, by then I had withdrawn from Cricinfo because, Cricinfo received a lot of funding in the late 90s, and I had to make a choice whether to continue the PhD or join Cricinfo full time. We had, I think, offices in Chippenham, right?
Yep, that's right. Well, we moved to Chippenham in 90s.
Or Bangalore. But I don't know if we could think of the counterfactual whether I made the right decision or not, but I decided I want to be in academia. So I continued to my PhD, and I sort of reduced my Cricinfo responsibilities. And Dougie, which was our life's scoring infrastructure, I kind of handed it over to Travis. And during the 96 World Cup, we had improved those earlier scripts, which was more to check the scorecards that generated stats. I had modified those. There was another friend who helped for a bit with those scripts, Nandan Nampally. And we had improved the script for 96 World Cup, those Perl scripts that would take the scorecards and generate stats. So I knew that Travis, and in the 99 World Cup, we had an arrangement with this company in San Diego, which wanted to show the scorecard in a Java applet. Java applets were the hot thing those days. We still felt our text-only scorecard was the way to go. But that Java applet needed the data from a real relational database to sort of update its scorecard. And to make that happen, I actually went to San Diego with Simon, and that's where I met Badri for the first time in '99 to sort of work with the company. And then we changed Dougie so that in addition to generating those live scorecards, the text-only scorecards, Dougie would also write ball-by-ball data into a relational database, which would then talk to the Java applet and feed that. But that was, as far as I know, the first time we had cricket data going into a relational database at Cricinfo. And Travis was looking at all of this, and he knew that ultimately statsguru had to be built on a relational database. Those Perl scripts were fine, but they could not be offered to general users, and they would not scale. So I think during that time, I knew that Travis was interested in sort of building this into a SQL database. So the original Perl scripts, what they were doing was they were taking this raw output and generating scorecards. So there was a lot of sort of parsing of fields and writing them out into a particular format. And Dougie was also writing into a relational database. And Travis just put two and two together. And he started taking the scorecard, parsing it out, and writing it out into a database, an actual database. But before doing that, he had to come up with a schema of what all to write so that you could generate stats from that database. And he did it essentially all on his own. Because I had stopped after the '99 World Cup, my involvement was almost zero. But I was in touch with Travis. So he would, he came to the US a couple of times, he stayed with me, and he didn't tell me the details, but I knew he was working on something. But when it was finally released, I think the announcement was June 2000 or something like that. I'm not sure. I had no idea that he was this close to building something like that.
Wow.
It was incredible what he had managed.
Yeah, it's a beautiful sort of filter. It's a beautiful tool to use for, and I'm sure every cricket fan at some point has played with it. And it's so easy to get lost. You can spend a whole day there, and then suddenly you're like, oh my God, I've not done any work. I've just been on statsguru all day, wondering what's going on. So thanks, Travis, for all the wasted hours.
Fall down the Wikipedia hole.
Exactly. Yeah. But many of our listeners won't be familiar with Dougie that you mentioned. Now, I have had the good fortune of doing live scoring in Cricinfo, live scoring and live ball-by-ball commentary and things, and have used Dougie that I use. But I think it'll be good to rewind a bit and talk about live scoring itself. When did that come on? When was the shift from the IRC updates to live scoring? How did that go? And it'll also be good to talk about the famous 1996 World Cup, Vishal, that you have written about live scoring actual games as well, the World Cup games.
I think Dougie was born in South Africa. Jacques de Villiers, Peter Vermeulen, out of Durban, was it? A university down there. And I think they wrote it like early, like 1990 or 91, something like that. It predates all of this, and it was absolutely revolutionary. It's a fantastic piece of software. In that it would send just single bytes of data across the network, and it would be peer-to-peer. So each client would connect to would allow 5 clients to connect to it, and then on down the line. And if a client disappeared, it automatically reconfigured itself, making the network. It was absolutely brilliant. Vishal will know a lot more about it than me, but that thing was revolutionary, and allowed us to get live feeds through from places which had almost no connectivity. It was Zimbabwe, Bangladesh. There was no other way of getting that data out of there. Certainly no way you could do a full text scorecard update every ball. But because we had this network had been built by Jack and Peter, that literally just single bytes came through and came through in a filtered way. It probably took a few seconds to actually permeate all the way through the network. But that really was the birth of being able to do live scoring.
Yeah, Vishal, any memories of Dougie days, the early Dougie days?
But so, as Simon said, that Dougie was a peer-to-peer protocol, and each client, again, like IRC, you had to download the source code and compile and run Dougie on a Unix-based machine. And it was doing which in networking we call application layer multicast. So where one simultaneously transmits the same thing to lots of other receivers. And so Dougie had this 1 to 5 to 5. So you sort of built a tree where you had a primary scorer was looking at the game and scoring the game ball by ball. And every ball, whatever happened, Dougie through this application layer multicast would send it to the other Dougie clients.
Got it.
So it was brilliant, technically absolutely brilliant. And as long as the clients stayed in sync, that one ball update was enough to update the full scorecard. And periodically, they might go out of sync, and Dougie had this whole protocol of sort of getting the state updates and being in sync. So, it was brilliant. The only problem to compile and run Dougie on a Unix-based machine, and there were limits to how long or how deep this tree could grow in those early days of the internet. So it was brilliant to produce the scorecard, but it was not that convenient to sort of publish the scorecard on a mass scale.
Got it. Okay.
Right. And that's what we did in the 96 World Cup, of combining Dougie with the web.
Yeah, so the 96 World Cup, you should talk a bit about that, because you had promised Cricinfo users that you're going to do live scoring of that. And then, come the first game and you continue the story. What happens?
So, Simon, do you want to give sort of the...
No, this is all your story.
Well, no, this is not my story. I mean, the promise was Simon and others worked really hard, including Professor Rao, to get an agreement done with PILCOM. So the 96 World Cup was organized jointly by Pakistan, India, and Sri Lanka. So PILCOM was the organizing committee, and they agreed, okay, Cricinfo would be the official live scorecard carrier of on the internet of the World Cup. And so, we are excited. All sorts of press releases went out, and everyone, the traffic to Cricinfo grew in anticipation of this, because suddenly started hearing the name Cricinfo in a very official capacity. Okay? It's associated with this World Cup. And they had said, they would make live scorecards that were being generated at the grounds. They would make those available to us, and we simply had to publish them on Cricinfo's database, so that everyone could go on the internet, go to Cricinfo and get the live ball by ball. So all that seemed fine in principle, and all we needed to know was what was the format of the scorecard. Right? What did it look like? Because we were very proud of our Cricinfo V1, so we wanted everything to follow our format just for consistency. Secondly, the scripts, you've heard about. The scripts expected the scorecards to look in a certain way, where the names and the data had to be in a certain format. So we kept asking them, can you please send us a sample of the scorecard, so that we'll make sure that if there's any translation needed to be done, I'll write scripts that will translate from their format to our format. But we kept asking and we heard nothing, zero. And so, we were kind of nervous what's going to happen. And we were making backup plans already. And okay, we have advertised to the world. We are going to carry these live scorecards. But if that doesn't happen, we will go back to our old ways of, hand editing scorecards and uploading them to the database. And you couldn't do that ball by ball, right?
Okay.
That was difficult. So when the first day of the tournament came and we still did not have the scorecards, they sent us, okay, no, you'll get the scorecards from this site, FTP. I don't know if you know about FTP, file transfer.
Yeah, FTP.
You could log into an FTP site and download programs and all sorts of things. And they said, okay, they'll be available at this site. This is the FTP password, and you should be able to get. So okay, great. Maybe we'll just write a script that'll log in, get the scorecards, and publish. So when I first logged into that FTP site, there was no scorecard for a few overs. Finally, when one scorecard appeared, it was already about 8 overs outdated. I think I got the card on the 20th over, and
this was the England-New Zealand game, right?
The first game.
Yeah.
I remember Hick was a player who was playing in the game, and his name was spelled in 3 different ways in one scorecard.
Yeah, because the first name can be spelled many names.
Yeah. So it was G.A.Hick somewhere, GA with no dots. And the card was terrible. There was no way, even if we got those cards ball by ball, I could write a script that, because there was no consistent input, they cannot be a consistent output. So there was no way that we could use those scorecards. So we got it really intermittently. First of all, we got it late. We got an outdated card. And then, they would update it once on their whim every 15 or 17 overs. It was completely pointless. So then, because everyone was expecting us to have live scorecards, people just flooded to Cricinfo. And we resorted to our hand-edited scorecards. And the first day, the traffic was so much on Cricinfo that our server, which is a machine at University in Oregon, its network card burned. Literally burned. So it melted because there was so much. They had never seen so much traffic. The university was wondering what's happening. But, the sort of buzz had been created about live scorecards, and everybody was flocking to Cricinfo, and we were sort of generating scorecards by hand. And then I remember Dougie. And this, what we were doing was not sustainable. Sometimes there were 2 or 3 games that were going on simultaneously, and there were volunteers in New Zealand or somewhere just trying frantically to edit these scorecards, by hand, uploading on our server. And it was not working out. And then, we had spoken about using Dougie in Cricket for a while. And then I sort of decided, okay, now is the time to do it. So in sort of one frantic night of coding with some help from Holland, I managed to fix a lot of Dougie errors, port it to our format, and create this live scoring infrastructure. That was sometime, 2 weeks or 10 days into the tournament.
Yeah.
And then next day onwards, we started covering every game live using Dougie, and we had true ball-by-ball scorecards from that day. I think since that day, Cricinfo has never missed an international game. But still, because there was still some bugs in Dougie, and it would crash occasionally, and I had to come and fix it. So I was scoring a lot of games that day because I knew how to fix things. A lot of people sort of got familiar with Dougie. And I remember scoring the finals. I remember scoring the India-Pakistan quarterfinals, the famous Bangalore game. And then I remember scoring the finals. Sitting on a VT100 text-only terminal, logged into Cricinfo server, using Dougie. But that 96 World Cup was the genesis of our live scorecards. So now, we had the archive complete of scorecards, but how do you keep it updated? Sort of this live scoring infrastructure solved that other part of the problem. So from then on, we had every scorecard accurate in our database, which eventually went into statsguru.
So that was a time when we were the busiest website in the world.
Yeah.
Number one. Number two
Yeah,
was
across all fields, right? Yeah.
yeah. Number two was Yahoo.
Yeah. It was the most popular website in the world, and that's probably when around the '96 World Cup is when I discovered Cricinfo, because that was when there were times in that World Cup when there was a game in one Group A and there was a game in Group B, and so I could see only one game, and so I needed to find out what's happening in Group B, and that's around when I got my first computer and internet. So I just said Google on one of those early search engines, Alta Vista or Yahoo or one of them, and I stumbled on Cricinfo and followed a few games. So for all you know, Vishal, that final, I probably followed your commentary as it was going on. I mean, of course, I had the TV on, but I was also probably following. Yeah.
Dougie originally did not have commentary. It just did the
scoring.
So we added the functionality where the scorer could also add commentary. Yeah. And one of the best and the funniest earliest commentators was Travis. He was this.
Yeah. The famous Sharjah game, right, in 98 or something. Did he give commentary for that? This was that Adam Holyoke series which they ended up winning and all that. So I think he was they had some legendary moments in that series.
Probably put a book together with Travis quotes.
For commentary, yeah, for sure.
Put a little.
For sure.
Yeah, okay. There was one series in which Keith Arthurton, the West Indies, he kept getting out on either 0 or 1. So in the entire
that was the '96 World Cup, by the way. Yeah,
that was the '96 World Cup.
Yeah.
Okay, so he had. His first 4 innings were all either 0s or 1s, and Travis started calling him binary.
Yes.
Then he came into bat for the 5th time and again got out on either 0 or 1. And Travis's commentary was, "I want to have your baby." This is being published all over the world.
Across the world, the most popular website in the world is publishing these comments.
Saying, "I want to have your baby." And so I think after that, one of the IRC regulars changed their IRC nick to binary baby.
On that, because you had an 8-character limit. That's where the name Cricinfo came from, cricket information. But you can only have 8 characters on IRC.
As a topic or as a...
No, as your nickname.
Oh, nickname. Oh, 8-character limit. Very interesting.
8 characters. So, yeah, Cricinfo. No, is 8 characters. That's what that... I said one other thing that actually Dougie and all this other thing Cricinfo didn't just bring data together from various people around the world. It also brought these brilliant programs that came in from all over the place, and it's just bringing that expertise together. And that's obviously something the internet's now famous for, but back then it was new.
Yeah, I mean, quite a few of them still, around. If you need to find them, I think, people like Rohan Chandran, Niran Karnik, all of them who, congregated around IRC around that time and followed Cricinfo. Yeah.
We're dying off, unfortunately.
Yeah.
We lost Dave Leibenman last year.
Yes, exactly. I remember that.
Well, and at one time we had about 2,000 people involved, contributors, large and small, and then we lost our Zimbabwe rep and we lost our New Zealand rep both to car accidents. I cannot remember their names now, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is, and invariably when something like that happens, the news comes through, and then there's an outpouring of grief and condolence because people, even though they might not have met them in person, they know them. They know their work. They know their IRC handles. When K.S. Rao passed, so many people remembered KSR and, what all he had done for the community. So, yeah, I think Travis is the latest blow here and such a big loss to what we could be. Coming back to Travis, he worked, he worked in Cricinfo in the 90s. Then he went to Wisden for a while, and then he worked in CricViz towards the last few years. So, if you talk about cricket and innovation and brand and everything, if you talk about publications in cricket, these three have, it's hard to look beyond these three. And Travis was there, all. Yeah.
Yeah, he's probably the only person that's made a complete career out of this. It's certainly not me. I left in 2001. Vishal has got, so that was his career. It's a fantastic. I had to apologize to his father for taking him away from Australia.
Yeah, he moved to England, right? Pretty early.
Yeah. Worked with Cricinfo,
Yeah, for sure. I think, if you look at maybe the longest involvement with Cricinfo, Travis is probably up there. And I can't think of anyone who would have had such a long association with
only Travis.
Yeah.
Think of it.
He went to Wisden for a while, but then ESPN
came back,
and then he came back to Cricinfo through that route. So,
well, was that during the time that Wisden owned Cricinfo?
Yeah. He came back when Wisden owned Cricinfo. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, this was great. As much as we talk about Cricinfo in the Wisden days and the ESPN days now and what it has grown into now, I think it's important to remember where it all started out. I think it's a remarkable story. I'm surprised there's not been a movie yet about it, but there should be, hopefully. If any filmmaker is taking note, you should get down to the project, because it's not just a cricket story. It's a story of the early days of the internet, and it is pioneering. It is inspiring. And you talk about these softwares, talk about like Dougie and Statsguru and all these things. They are still very relevant, and it's not like they have gone out of thing. They're very elegant. They're very well done, and it's great. So thank you, Simon. Thank you, Vishal, for helping our listeners understand all this, and for helping me see all that happened back then.
Thank you, Siddharth.
Thank you. And to our listeners, if you have any comments or questions, or if you were one of the volunteers who has memories of those days of Cricinfo, you can leave a comment on our website, 81allout.com, or you can tweet us at 81allout, or you can get in touch with us via email. We have our email on our website. You can also rate and review the podcast if you like it. It really helps us get a wider reach when you add a review there. And keep listening. Usual reminder, we are also republishing some cricket classics. We republished War Minus the Shooting by Mike Marquesi. We've been talking about the 1996 World Cup, a book that covers the 1996 World Cup. Mike Marquesi, again, the late Mike Marquesi, wrote a fantastic travelogue and sort of a socio-political story around that World Cup. Very well written on cricket as well. We also then recently republished Mike Coward's book, Cricket Beyond the Bazaar, which is about Australia's tours to the subcontinent through the years, but primarily about the 80s, where he talks about the Thai Test and their tour to Pakistan in 88. So pick that up as well. I'll give you links to that. And keep listening and support us in any way you can. Thanks a lot. See you in about a week or 10.
Have won the series. They're going to get back for two. India